And what we're going to discuss in this brief half an hour is what illusions tell us about how we think and how we perceive. And I study illusions because they're a very nice window into how the brain works, because they can reveal the hidden constraints of the perceptual system in a way that normal perceptual processes do not. And in doing so, what I want to try and do today is actually show you something in the larger context of how we actually build up belief systems. So we're going to enjoy this wondrous adventure into one of the greatest mysteries that we have, our inner mind. Now, most people take vision for granted because it comes to us so easily. We live in this very visually rich and complex three-dimensional world, and we don't really think about it much because our representation of our world is so seamless. It's so perfect. And a complex task, such as driving down a street, these trees are coming at us at a great rate of speed. They're changing shape and changing color and all these things. If you try to calculate it all out, it would be insuperably difficult to do, but we just do all these things without even thinking about it. When we tilt our head, the world doesn't tilt. It remains stable. When we blink, the light doesn't go out. The brain fills it in. And this is just a wonderful thing. But sometimes one can make mistakes when driving, and it could be sometimes quite disastrous or unexpected. Now, nature doesn't usually fool us. The people who fool us are magicians. Now, I'm not a magician. But most of us sort of tend to let go when we see a magic show and just go with the magic. But I want to draw a little bit of how much do we pay attention. So I'm going to show you a friend of mine, an English magician, who's going to perform a card magic trick for you. And I want you to try as hard as you can to actually spot him doing this trick. And see if you can do it. For the first, you always want to say, let me see if I can catch him. But let's see how someone who's trained to fool you and see if you can catch him doing this trick.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Right, okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table. Give a little click of the fingers, and you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing colour-changing.
How many of you caught the trick? But this was not about the color of the cards. Let's see what you missed. So let's watch this video again.
Hi, I'm Richard, this is Sarah, and we're going to perform the amazing colour-changing card trick with this blue-backed deck of cards. Now the idea is very simple. I'm just going to spread the cards in front of Sarah and ask her to push any card towards the camera.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to go for this card here.
Okay. Now Sarah could have selected any card at all from the deck, but she selected the card which is now face down on the table. And what I'm going to ask her to do is show us which card she selected.
Right, so the card that I chose was in fact the 3 of diamonds.
The 3 of diamonds, okay, an excellent choice. That card goes back into the deck. Now I'm just going to spread the cards face up on the table. Give a little click of the fingers, And you'll see that Sarah's card here has now got a blue back. Not particularly surprising. What's slightly more surprising is all of the other cards have got red backs. And that is the amazing color-changing card trick.
Now, why does that happen? It's because when we assess a scene, what the brain does, it tosses out most of the information. What it's primarily concerned with is the meaning of the scene. If it doesn't really contribute to the meaning of the overall meaning of the scene you're in, your brain dismisses it, it ignores it. And even in real life, these situations, I'll give you an example of a test. Watch the woman, notice the color of the man's shirt and his hat. Now, there were a number of uses of this demonstration where they actually changed race, hair color, and gender, and the person didn't notice. Now, sometimes it's just hard to decide between two matters. For example, imagine being the editor of Life magazine and coming across this unretouched photograph and trying to decide which body that head belongs to. So sometimes it's hard for the brain to decide.
What's the answer?
The answer is, well, by a show of hands, how many do you think it's on the left? How many of you think it's on the right? Now it's interesting, more males said on the right than the women. But women judge this because they have another cue. Fashion. See? Now, sometimes we make mistakes in terms of experience. It's the left. So you can see you don't normally pass a glass fluorescent tube through two perpendicular holes like this. Sometimes we have things that go against our experience. Sometimes, and this is a very interesting demonstration, I've looped this film so you can actually see the true construction of these nuts. And watch as it rotates back how fast your perception changes. And now we're going to show you the true construction again. You know it 100% now. And yet as it rotates back, bang, the illusion pops into your consciousness. And that's very interesting because what makes you you? If there's anything that's very special about you, it's that inner dialogue you have upstairs, that ability that you have to separate between truth and falsehood, that you know you're looking at something that's false and can see it as false. But here I'm showing you something that's false and you see it as true, or vice versa. And you don't have any control over it, and even in terms of successive experience. So I'm going to go through an example of all aspects of visual and sensory information to show what the brain actually does. It interprets. So in terms of line, the simplest, do these appear to be wavy lines, both horizontally and vertically? But in fact, they're all straight and parallel. And it's actually a perfect green and white checkerboard, but at the intersections, I have just a two black checks that are rotated back and forth. And that's enough to throw off your line detectors. In terms of size and shape, may I have the lovely Ivana up here to measure these two tabletops. They look dissimilar in size, don't they? But they're actually identical in size. You have to do this. Can you do it without, try the width. Yeah. They are identical in size and shape. Even though you know they're identical, in terms of three-dimensionals, you can be tricked. In terms of dark and light, does the block on the left appear to be darker than the block on the right? Hold up your index finger and cover the middle section. Do you see they're identical? Take your finger away. Put it back. And even though you know 100% they're identical, you can't stop your perception. In terms of black and white, does the disc on the left appear white and the disc on the right appear black? Everyone agree with that? But not everything is black and white. Sometimes there are shades of gray because this is their true color. Now that you know that, let's go back. Can you perceive those as identical grays? I know everyone's tired, but you're still a very bright audience. Use all that mental energy you have to try to see those two as identical grays. You can't do it, can you? In terms of color, Ivana, point out. The yellow square in the shadow is identical to the brown square on the top. Do those look identical in color? Again, try as hard as you can to see that this is their true color. Now that you know those are their true color, try to see it that way. Can you perceive it that way? Come on, Esther. Can you do it? You're shaking your head. It's impossible to do. In terms of transformation, how things transform, and sometimes they transform in a way that we don't expect. In terms of time. So, on the left, we have inside the annulus, we have a blinking dot, blinking disc, white. So I want the left side of the audience to say white when the left disc is white, and I want the right side of the audience to say white when the right side inner disc is on. You ready? Ready, set, go. Now it's interesting that the audience is in sync, but your vision is not in sync because they appear to be out of phase here, but in the audience it is in phase. So this is what they're truly doing. And even though you know that, they appear to be out of phase. And we just demonstrated that. In terms of motion, so many of you might have wanted to take that, ride on your chopper down some lonely country road and you feel like you're going nowhere. That's exactly what's happening here. There is no motion, even though it appears that everything is moving down a country road. So if you just looked at any of the posts or the tree, you see it's just flashing on and off, and I'm flashing it at a rate that it gives it the appearance that there's motion. In terms of relative rate of motion, fixate on the little cross down on the lower left. And does it appear that the blue and yellow square appear to be sort of zigzagging across? Does everyone see that? This is their true rate of motion. Let's go back. All these things, I'm going through all the aspects of visual sensory information to show you that underneath it, we're actually fairly constrained in how we build up images. This, by the way, is an example of how you can make a practical device out of this. This is a levitating water illusion that I created, where it appears that you have multiple streams of water going up and down. I can make them do all sorts of things, but they're actually always going down.
So touch one of them. Just touch it, Jeff. Look at that. How cool is that?
It's like all a little spray to it. Amazing. That's the whole 20 kids can be in it at once. It's amazing.
That is so cool.
So by understanding what the rules are that allow you to make sense of the world, you can then use those same rules to make the world not make sense. I hope that makes sense. In terms of shadow, you see the ball rising above the floor, you see a ball rolling across the floor, and you see the ball bouncing. Does everyone see the three different trajectories? Ivana, can you cover the shadow, please? No, cover it, or you're too low. Or cover it with your hands. Cover the shadow with your hands. Just the shadow. And you'll see the trajectory of the ball is identical in all three cases. So that tells us that underneath we have all these rules that work beneath the level of your awareness that allow us to make sense of this world, for example, in terms of shadow. In terms of rotation, pick any point on the wing. and then describe the motion of that biplane. What does it look like that plane is doing? Is it rotating in a smooth way, or is it rotating, slowing down and stopping, and then what do you see? But the rotation of that plane is continuous and in a uniform rate. So just make a little peephole with your hand, and you'll see that, in fact, the plane is rotating in a uniform rate. In terms of what you expect to see, note the length of the train and the tunnel. This is not a digital trick, it's a perceptual trick. I'm going to show it from 3 different angles. In terms of sound, now I'm going to show you an example of how one sense can actually influence another sense. So fixate on the cross on the bottom and describe the motion of the 2 yellow discs. What do you see them doing? They're crossing. Does everyone see that? So now let's look at it again. Fixate on the bottom. Now what do? They bounce. It's the same visual display, but I'm showing you an example of how when you have an ambiguous situation, the brain likes to resolve that ambiguity, and by attaching a sound at the impact, it resolves it, so you now have an example of sound influencing your vision. In terms of something that isn't even there. Now this is a classic illusion known as a subjective contour. But does everyone see a triangle in the center? Does that triangle appear to be brighter than the surround? Cover the Pac-Man. And you'll see there's no difference in brightness. So you're seeing a brightness that's not even there. So it's not a matter of what you see is what you get. That's what a lot of scientists originally thought why it wasn't going to be a big problem with vision, is because, oh, it must be what you see is what you get. But in fact, it's not what you see is what you get. Your brain is constantly interpreting. So you can actually make really nifty sculptures using this principle, like we did over here. In terms of age and experience, what do you see here? Deborah, what do you see? What do you see here? A couple embracing. Actually, this is an illustration from a children's book. It's actually just dolphins. Do you see the dolphins? Can you point out the dolphins, Ivana? There's small dolphins. There's a dolphin. 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 Does everyone see that now? This is actually one of the best examples of priming by experience that I know. If you're under the age of 8 and you haven't been ruined yet, you only see dolphins. In fact, when my daughter had just turned 7 and we had a birthday party, I had this on a t-shirt. And her mom said, "You cannot wear this at her birthday party." And I said, "They're 7. They will only see dolphins." So while in front of the horrified parents, I formed a line. What do you see? Dolphins. Anything else? No. Next. What do you see? Dolphins. Anything else? No. And it was interesting just to watch the parents' reaction. By the way, I did a gallery at the Boston Science Museum, and they asked for a whole, on illusions and perception, they asked for a whole series of graphics. And I actually persuaded a rather conservative science museum to actually install this poster. And they did, and I asked the director, did you ever get a response to this poster? And he said, well, actually, that poster turned out to be our most popular poster. I said, did you ever receive any complaints about it? And he said, once we had a group of nuns that came in and complained about it, but when we told them it was priming, what you saw depended on upon your experience, they giggled and went away. In terms of not learning, scan this photograph. Do you see anything unusual in it? What do you see? You see her butt? No, you haven't learned anything from what I've been teaching you. That's not her butt, that's the woman's armpit. In terms of oh, by the way, the most important and essential part of information is context. And this is a very critical thing in terms of education, in terms of Twitter and things like this. And if you remove context from information, you can lead, or put something in improper context, you can lead the reader or the viewer to false information. So you can come up with some rather erroneous conclusions based on false context. So I'm going to show you a clip that started going viral on YouTube and on Twitter. It was twittered and so forth about Obama being snubbed on a receiving line.
Have good relations with both leaders.
And there was a tagline of it being a racist reaction to Obama. You see how it appears that they're snubbing him? And I watched as this clip, out of context, started, gaining momentum. Oh, those commies. How could they treat our president like this? But actually, this was a receiving line in the White House, and he was introducing them. So just by robbing something of an essential element, such as context, you can provide a false illusion. In terms of paradox, how many of you have played with blocks as a child? Do you think you could have played with these type of blocks? Where you fit a larger block inside a smaller block, inside a smaller block, within a smaller block, inside an even smaller block. But your brain doesn't reject it. Even though everyone here knows that this is a paradox, it's impossible. But your brain doesn't do it because you spent your lifetime interpreting two-dimensional perspective drawings into three-dimensional mental representations. You can't stop doing it now. You have a perceptual framework. This is a very important point. You have a perceptual framework that gives you a fairly accurate representation of the world you move about in. So when incoming information maybe is inconsistent or unusual or even paradoxical or even impossible, your brain is not going to throw out an organizational structure when faced with this kind of information. It's going to take that information and map it in such a way onto the pre-existing organizational structure that is supportive and consistent with your organizational principle. Here's another example of a physical impossible box. You can see the back beam goes from the back in front of the front to the back again. So, in terms of meaning out of gibberish, another example of cross-modal interactions. You've heard of playing a song backwards and you hear the hidden lyrics. So I've taken a selection from Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, and I'm going to play it for you forwards and then backwards. And there's a hidden message there, and I want you to try and listen very carefully and see if you can hear the hidden message. Can we turn it up? Now I'm going to play the same piece backwards. I want you to listen carefully for the hidden lyrics. many of you, by a show of hands, could understand that clearly and distinctly? Okay, anything else? Did anyone? No? Okay, so now I'm going to play you exactly what you just heard before, but I'm going to supply you with the lyrics. So this is an example of vision influence. Before I showed you an example of hearing a sound influencing what you see, now I'm going to give you an example of a visual cue influencing what you hear. So we're going to play exactly the same thing, but this time I want you to read along the lyrics, with the lyrics. Read along. Now, I hear laughter. How many of you can now understand the lyrics? Everybody's hand goes up. Now, I played you exactly the same thing, but it's interesting. And if I've given this group one set of lyrics, this group another set of lyrics, and that group another set of lyrics, all three of you would have heard three different versions. So to show you that I could do this for anything, I recently gave a lecture up at NASA Ames and Singularity University on the occasion of the 40th anniversary, and I asked the people at NASA Ames if they knew about the hidden message in Neil Armstrong's famous quotation when he landed on the moon, and I was surprised that there was no reference to it in any of the news, and they didn't know anything about it, and I said, well, I'll play it for you backwards.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
On the bottom.
Never let it fall. Never let it fall. Never let it fall.
I've done nothing to this except play it backwards. You didn't know that was there, did you? So, so stop. What's going on here? Most people think, oh, it's very easy. It's a camera is what it sees, what we get. But as I said before, the brain is the great interpreter. And that's what the brain tries to do. It tries to attach meaning to the scene. It uses constraints at a local level to build up form, color, motion. And these are very powerful constraints that we can't override with our intellectual ability. And then, by the way, when we look at a scene, we can see it has color, it has depth, and it has texture. You can see that the statue's in front of the painting, and so forth. You can pull away from the scene, and you can see all the different depth relationships, but you can be tricked, because here you have an example of trompe l'oeil. The whole picture was painted. And this is a good example of what's going on in the three-dimensional world, which gets translated onto the back of our retina as two semi-flat sheets. So we must sort of reconstruct the three-dimensional world from two semi-flat images. And this is a tricky process. And the brain has developed all these constraints and rules to allow us to do that. And this is what I've been trying to do in my research for many, many years, and now many people in vision science have been trying to do this, and it's to uncover what those rules are that allow us to make sense of the world. And a single line can remove ambiguity. For example, it doesn't take a lot to switch it. So here you have two silhouettes that appear to be facing in two different directions. But I've inserted a single line, and you can see it's enough to cause your perception to switch. Your brain doesn't need a lot of information to switch it. Now, this is all part of a simple but deeper argument. I have shown you things that you thought were one thing but were really another. Even when I told you that something isn't what you think it is, and even when I showed it to you by either measuring it, revealing it, or through successive experiences, it's hard for your mind to accept what's really going on there. And even though you know you're being tricked and you know the truth, you can't overcome it. And this perceptual inability to accept some of these visual and sensory tricks, even when you know they work, is part of a simple and deeper argument. And perhaps your own worldview is preventing you from seeing, recognizing, and internalizing some ideas that fall outside of your own world or could be interpreted by others from the way you know them to be true. So, the search for meaning. First, your perceptual system tries to build up the basic scene that you're in. In other words, what's the scene? I'm here. And as I showed early on in the presentation, you were looking at the magic trick. That was the meaning of the scene. You weren't paying attention to the color of the background. It's what is the scene? Are you in a friendly environment? Are you in a hostile environment? And as I also pointed out, your perceptual system does not reject false or contradictory information. It maps it in a way that is supportive of the organizational structure. And your perceptual system is the great organizer of your mental space. You don't want to toss it out because you've encountered a few things that are inconsistent or unusual or paradoxical, because that organizational system is fairly successful. So another great organizer for your world is your core belief system. This starts to develop through education about the time you're about 8 years old. And when I discuss a core belief, I'm talking about what gives and defines a person's meaning in life. It could be many things. I'm not talking about whether they think a Toyota versus a Honda or a Mac versus a PC, but a person's very core belief systems. And once this core belief system is set, then the perceptual system will now map all incoming information, even when inconsistent, unusual, and paradoxical, in a way that is supportive of that belief system. This is an interesting insight. So when you think you're arguing with someone who's a core believer, for example, they become emboldened after you argue with them. They don't not only get weakened. So you get people who map the world in different ways. Take, for example, the person who maps the world in a rationalist, scientific way, as opposed to a person who maps the world in a magical way. They both see the same world. They both navigate through it, but they map the world in very different ways. That incoming information to the magical thinker, everything that all the experiences that they come across are mapped in a way that is supportive of their belief system. If something happens, there was a reason for it. If they trip on a rock, that rock was there for a reason, or whatever it is. All those experiences they have are supportive of their belief system. In the same way, the scientist who is a rationalist goes to the same world and maps those same experiences according to his belief system. So when the scientist talks to the magical thinker and says, oh, you don't have those experiences, he doesn't understand that, yes, they do have experiences. When the scientist says, you have no evidence, he doesn't understand. They see evidence for their mapping of the world. They have all their experience are mapping towards their belief system. So that's why there's a sort of disconnect. You have to think in terms of how are they mapping their core belief system. And this goes to all sorts of things, in terms of racism, in terms of politics, in terms of relationships, all sorts of areas. It's a good idea to figure out how people are mapping the world. And this is why when we sometimes argue with the people, as I say, they become emboldened. So when I'm arguing with a core believer, they say, after I give the most convincing arguments, all the evidence, and afterwards they say, you know, I'm stronger in my beliefs. And I'm going, huh? So you can take this even to commonality of core beliefs. Well, these are certainly well-known core beliefs. So let's take a hypothetical. Suppose I am an ardent freethinker, atheist. So I gather a fundamentalist Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, et cetera, in a forum where they have agreed to listen to me espouse the arguments for free thought. And they have said, I'll be an open-minded and listen to see whether you can convince me. And I give the most impassioned talk of my life, uninterrupted, slides, evidence, rational thinking, everything. In fact, my arguments are so convincing, I can't believe that anyone wouldn't be bowled over by my arguments. I rest my case. I go to the fundamentalist Christian, so what did you think? Well, Al, that was excellent. But you know what the Bible says? That's the first thing out. So I go to the next one, the rabbinical scholar. What did you think? Al, that was marvelous. But you know what the Torah said? And each one of them is stronger in their belief system after I've argued with them rather than weakened. So you have to think of all these, because between the time that my arguments go from the inner ear inside to the cortex, the brain somehow, at some conscious level, takes those arguments and maps it on a way that's supportive rather than contradictory, because the brain doesn't want to dismiss an organizational principle. And so you can have tragedy that can sometimes reboot the whole system. There are many ways to get out of the system, but because I'm running out of time, I want to, how can we deal with this sort of situation? If you think of all these core belief systems as circles, trying to bang on the outside of the circle is very, very difficult to break through. And some of those walls are very impenetrable. But if you think of them in terms of common beliefs, in terms of a Venn diagram, all these belief systems have places where they overlap, commonalities. So if you want to get someplace, you focus on the commonalities rather than banging on the outside of the circle, which is just going to embolden the other side. So you look for the area where they overlap. And it's very easy, whatever the belief system is, to start listing what the commonalities are and then focusing on that particular area and building the trust and pushing those boundaries out further. And that's something I'd like to give people to start thinking about in terms of how we deal in relationships and all these kind of things. So with that, I'm sort of out of time. And I thank you for listening and congratulate you for